Start recording again. So thank you guys for signing up. Thanks for coming out. My name's Matt Romanowski. You saw me on the HPDRE group. Um, I run a website called trailbreak.net that started as kind of the beginnings of my journey with race car data acquisition, and have developed to, I'm an AiM dealer. I have a AiM sales and support um, service, and I do a lot of training for people, and that's where these webinars are coming in. Um, I've learned a lot from someone who's sort of a mentor and a colleague, and the AiM head of support who's on the webinar tonight, Roger Cadell. If you don't know Roger, he works for AiM. He travels around the country and puts on seminars much like this, but it's a whole day, all over through different groups. I'm going to have one, we'll see in a second, in the Northeast this winter, but as we start to scroll through, we can see this is my session. It's going to be in Manchester, New Hampshire, March 24th and 25th. And then these are the ones that Roger has locked in for this year, but there'll be more coming. So if one of these is near you, it's a great opportunity to see things in person with Roger explaining it. You get a full day that you can ask questions, you can interact, you just get a ton out of it, and it's a really good way to kind of springboard your knowledge of the system and your data. When you do software part of it, you do the analysis part. Even if you weren't an AiM user, you'll learn a lot from it because you're able to take the things that Roger teaches you about a speed trace or one of the other graphs and pull that together with everything else. So it's a really great opportunity. The other one I want to give you before we start is just some resources. And don't worry that you have to copy all these down. It'll be in the recording, and I'll get it out to you guys tomorrow, and it'll be up on YouTube. Is the things that we see here are pretty great. As this website is the AiM videos that Roger's put together, and I think there's north of 80 of them now. And they cover all aspects of the data, of how to configure your system, how to analyze data. You've downloaded your data and you're not sure what to do. It's got videos towards that. So this is the AiM YouTube channel. You don't have to remember that. If you Google AiM user videos YouTube, it'll pop up. It's a really terrific source for everybody. The next one here is a website run by a gentleman named John Block, Auto-Ware. John puts together 5-part webinars that really get in depth of how to use your system. And then John's background is he's a race engineer, and he not only teaches you how to use the software, he teaches you how to think like an engineer, and you learn how to kind of dive into data that way and see what John does. There's a cost to those. I think I don't remember now, maybe they're $200 now. It's worth every penny. If John charged $500, I'd still say it's worth it. You will learn so much, and you learn a great way to think about things. The next one, trailbreak.net, is my website. The following one, renlist.com, is a Porsche forum, but there's a data section under racing. It is a great spot to discuss data, to ask questions, just to read some of the old ones. We have some great threads there, best practices, and tons of questions to answer for people. So I think it's a good way. 2 books that I really like to recommend, and I know Roger recommends them in his classes, and you may have heard of these before. The first one, A Practical Guide to Race Car Data Analysis. You can buy it on Amazon. It's printed to demand. What's really cool about this book is it has appendix in it, and the appendix goes with each chapter. So if you read a chapter and he talks about a math channel, in the back he gives you the math channel written towards AiM software. So rather than have to try to develop everything on your own, you're able to read the book, understand how Bob would do the analysis with it, and then put that math channel to use right away without having to guess at it or get frustrated in the writing of the math channels. So I think it's a great resource and a great way for people to jump into math channels and start working with them. The last resource here is Making Sense of Squiggly Lines, a book by a great data guy, Chris Brown. And It's the most accessible data book. It's the one that most easily teaches you how to use your data, how to look at things, to give you an idea of the shape of the graph that you want to look for, and some of the real basics, but they're the key to being to do everything later on. So those are kind of all the resources. I highly suggest Bob's book's about $80 or $90. It's worth every penny. Order it. Chris's book is, I think, $40. You can get it on Amazon as well. It's another great resource to really teach you how to use things, and I really recommend everybody jump into them. So now what I was going to jump into is some of the questions and the comments that people gave me when they filled out the form. And the basics of those, as I emailed you, is the difference between Ray Studio 2 and 3, and which one of those you need to use for your system. I was going to get into Ray Studio 2 analysis, is what we all use a little bit. One of the questions that comes up a lot, and I certainly got a few of, was how the segments work in Ray Studio 2. So we're going to get into that a little bit. We're going to do a TrackMate integration, because I know there's a lot of people that have the legacy TrackMate systems that have maybe switched over to AiM, and this way you can import those files, as well as if you have a friend that's running TrackMate system, you can now import their data into Ray Studio 3 so you can compare it that way. A really great feature and something great that AiM did in buying the rights to that data file. We're going to look at an intro to math channels. Math channels can be its own webinar, and we'll probably jump into one of those later on in the year and really dive into that. But I want to give you an intro of how it works, and then that'll let you run with it a little bit and try some things out on your own. And then we're going to finish with just some basics of getting around Ray Studio 3 and doing some kind of simple analysis, and I think to show you a couple little tricks that'll help you out. So to get going with it, we're going to hop out of the intro screen here and look at my desktop here, and we're going to have our 3 pieces of software that we use in AiM all the time. And as we do that, they're right here, and I'm going to highlight them, put a circle around them for us. And that doesn't show too well, so let's see if we can kind of highlight it. There we go. So we have these 3 right in the center. And what we have here is Ray Studio Analysis, Ray Studio 2, and Ray Studio 3. And the confusion in all this came about as AiM released the most current loggers, and those being the MXL2, the MXS, the MXG, the Evo 4S, and the Evo 5, soon to include the Solo 2 and the MXM. Those systems run on a different architecture than the old systems, and those get programmed and downloaded through Ray Studio 3. And that's where all the setup and everything from those goes through. If you have one of the, I will call them older systems, being a MXL Pista, a Solo 2, an Evo 4, or any of the older cart stuff prior to the Micron 5, which we probably don't have anyone here that has those, but it's possible. Those all get configured and downloaded through Ray Studio 2. And tomorrow when I email out the recording from this webinar, you'll see the link in YouTube to the webinar I did last week, and that one covers all the details of downloading software through both of those, or downloading your data through both of those pieces of software, whichever one's appropriate, and it gives you all the options of how you can do it and why you might want to do those things. The final part of that is, regardless of which of these you download to or download from, right now all the analysis is done in Ray Studio Analysis. In the future, and hopefully it's later this year, but I can't say when exactly it'll be because they're still working on finalizing the software, the analysis part will be done in Ray Studio 3. I'm guessing when that's rolled out that just as it is now, all the software you need can be downloaded together and put together. So right now the basics is, if you have one of the older loggers, you use Ray Studio 2 to download and you analyze in Ray Studio Analysis. If you have one of the newer loggers, you use Ray Studio 3 to configure and download, and then you analyze in Ray Studio Analysis. One of the great parts, and one of the questions that somebody had asked before, was with AiM, one of the great things is that regardless of what system you have and when you downloaded your data and where it came from, it is always able to be compared and analyzed versus all the other AiM products. So if you update from your Solo to a Solo 2, if you update from an MXL Pista to a MXL Pista to an MXG or one of the other products, you can always analyze that data and compare it against all your old data. You never lose the ability to do that, which to me is a very important part of using a data system, is that as we build all this data and we collect these things, it's really kind of intellectual property. It gives you a great recording and a great history of what you've done, and this lets you go back to see it. So tonight we're going to kind of jump right into Race Studio analysis. And I'm going to open it up here, and I wanted to cover a couple basic options that when we open it, it's really going to help us in how to view our files and what we can do with them. So when we open up analysis, is the great part about how this is written is it has a really strong database function. And we can use that in a couple ways. The first one is any of these column titles, we can double click to put everything in ascending or descending order. So the way we typically use that, or the way I use it the most, is just by test date. And we can double click it, and it goes oldest test to the beginning. We double click again, it brings up the most current test. This is a great way that if you knew something, you had just recently been somewhere and you wanted to look at that data, you can pull it up very quickly this way. And across the columns here, we have the test name, the date, we can have the track, we can open up these columns and it'll give us the number of laps in the test. It'll give us the best lap number, what that time was, the driver, the type of test, all those sorts of things, whatever our comments were. So we can really use this to kind of organize things. Or if we said we want to do it super quick, we could do it by track, right? We can search through all these different ways that we might want. But like I said, I almost always just go by date. The next part that I go to and I use a lot is this selection criteria button. So let me just kind of highlight it up here, is use selection criteria. And that lets us really use the database function of the software, where we can go in and select a track. And we're going to say unlock all of them. So we can start out clear of everything and say we want to look at Watkins Glen. And we can say okay, and then we don't have a vehicle selected, we can say unlock all, and we'll just go in here, pick my name, and we can see all my tests that the times that I've recorded data when I was the driver at Watkins Glen. And then what's pretty nice about this is when the column titles come in, you go, hey, what was my best lap at Watkins Glen? And we can look at it and we go 123. And I know for me running the long course, that was never a time that was attainable because I don't have an Indy car. So that one was actually a time the car broke and I took the NASCAR shortcut. But we can say my best lap there was a 214. And then we can jump into this data to analyze it later. So this is just kind of a quick overview of how these areas of the software work well and things that we can do with it. The other part I wanted to touch on this quickly is one of the nice things we can do from this screen is right-click on a file and choose to email it. So if you do that, it'll automatically open up your email program, and it comes up automatically with the AiM software email address. So it would send it back to Italy if it was a file you had a problem with that you wanted them to look at, or you can delete that and send it to a friend or whoever you want to share that data file with, and it automatically attaches all the folders or all the files that you need with it. So it's a really nice feature and way to send things. So when someone says, hey, send me that file, you don't have to go through the file folders and try to figure it all out. You can just right click, send it off, and you're done. So with that, that's the basics of the database part. And then I just want to jump into a file and we'll work on this one. My data I'm always happy to share with people so we can put it all out. And when we pull it up, this one is a quick little feature here that we can talk about, is when we have the measures on the side, is here it has speed and then we have gear number, and the speed's all the same. So what we can do is double click on one of those graphs and it'll auto scale this. So it says, our slowest point and our highest point. It fits everything in between. We can do the same thing with the gear. So now we have 0 to 5 instead of the numbers that were in there before. So it's a good way to automatically make everything fit in, and we don't have to mess with it too much. But as we look at this, we go, hey, there's segments. And the first place in AiM that we see the segments show up in our map is right up here. And these color bands correspond to the segments. And when we want to see that map, the way we do it is we go map and then show track map. And that'll pop up our map with all our segments. And we can scale that. And as we make it bigger, the numbers will show up on the map for us. So we can see, oh, that's always a tricky one. We might not be able to do it that way. Where did it go on us? So we can see we have our first segment, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. And then as we do that, we have our numbers that correspond to where that segment is. This is a little bit of an art in itself, and we'll talk about that. But this is the segment as I drew it up, and I wanted to segment the track. For different tracks, I might have 2 or 3 segmented maps because I might want to focus on one area or one particular section. So sometimes if it's a track that has a special chicane, I might have 3 segments. I might have the chicane I want and everything before and everything after. And then that lets me really hone in on a spot. And then I might have one like this that's split up a little bit bigger. So the map and the segments become pretty important in how to segment, so we can get to the segment analysis part. But I wanted to go through kind of the screens of how we make this map if we didn't have one. So if we go to a track for the first time and we pull it up, we can go to say make a new map. And this is the map that AiM says fits this track. And we can see it has a lot more segments. Here's start finish. The little tick mark off to the side says that's the direction of the track. And we see this one has, I don't know how many segments here. If we had a guess, there's, if we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there's 12 segments. And they don't all make perfect sense. But Watkins Glen's a track where it works pretty well. And we go, well, this isn't too bad of an analysis, but we don't really get the entrance to the bus stop very well. So maybe it's something that we want to change. When we do this screen is a pretty powerful screen. It has a lot of ways that we can do that. The start of it is we get to pick the kind of vehicle. We have 2 wheels with a speed and a gyro, or 4 wheels with speed and lateral acceleration. So ours, we'd really say it's a 4-wheel vehicle because I was in a car, and we have lateral acceleration in the car, in the dash. We have that channel, that accelerometer is built into it. The next box here is the kind of track that we're working with. Is it a closed track, which Watkins Glen is? It closes on itself. Is it a figure 8 if it was a track that somewhere the track crossed over itself, which is something that is pretty rare? Or is it an open shape that maybe is an autocross or a hill climb or something to that effect? The next window that we have is the lap that we're going to base that information on. And what's important here is that you pick a good lap, because if we switch and we pick a lap that's not as good, the map will change a little bit because it's basing the segments on the data it collected. So if that data is really good, then it's going to pick really good information. If the data that we're inputting isn't good, it's a classic case of a GIGO, right? Garbage in, we get garbage out. So we can see as we put in other laps, the data isn't nearly as good. So if we go back to the good lap, we can alter the track shape here as we do it. We can see that really kind of messes everything up. And we can edit it, but we also have this option down here to go back to the default values, if you see that down here. So as we get everything wrong, we can always go back and it'll straighten us out to where the original part was. When we get to the channel threshold, this is a way that it kind of filters the channel part. And again, we can tweak the map here and pick what we want out of it. And the same thing with the corner identity is that's going to change the values it uses to say where a corner starts with the lateral acceleration. And these are all tricks to get it to auto-generate that map. I kind of approach my track segments a little bit different, but one of the things is I think Roger has something to add here quickly, so I'm going to turn his microphone on and let him share that with us as well. So go ahead, Roger.
Thanks, Matt. I just want to add one thing up in the corners and upper right-hand box up there. You talked about 2 wheels versus 4 wheels.
Yep.
And one of the things that it's odd AiM speak, I suppose, at this point, but when it says gyro speed and gyro requested, if the user has a GPS sensor, the best way to use those 2 boxes is to always leave the gyro requested. It's then using the internal gyro information plus GPS positional information to build even a better track map. So if the guy's got a GPS sensor, leave that 2-wheel one actually selected. You'll find it's better. It takes all the banking out of it and uses a little bit better track mapping if you have a GPS sensor.
All right, excellent. I see we're all learning something here today. The teacher becomes the student. The way I usually approach my track maps is a little bit different than using what we just covered, which is really the automated way. Is I always look at it and I say, okay, how do I want to make this track look from the start? So what I do is I use the next area that we're going to look at is I look at the rotation to see if the track looks in the orientation I want. And then I go down to these modify parts and I build my own track map. So if we just look, the mirror does exactly as it says, and it just mirror image the track. If you want to move it to where kind of north and south are and orientate to the compass differently. And the same thing here is as we rotate it, we can make the track look kind of more, that's the classic view of Watkins Glen in the track map and everything else, because we have the front straight, we have the S's, the back straight, the bus stop, and through the boot. A question that just popped up that I think is an important one that Mark Schnorr asked us is, do I always need an external GPS? The answer is no, because you can use a beacon to, I guess I should back up a little bit. If you have a Solo or a Solo DL, the GPS is built into the unit, so it's always working. If you have one of the other loggers, whether it was an MXL Pista, an Evo 4, an MXL2, an Evo 4S, and an Evo 5, you can use a beacon, and that happens, World Outlaw guys use the beacons all the time because they're inside a dome or inside a building. But you will get the most accurate and easiest to use, I shouldn't say maybe most accurate, but certainly the easiest to use data by using the GPS, because the start finish is more accurate. You don't run into some other problems. It's a much easier way as a user to use it. So Mark said he's using a Solo, so that way you don't have to worry about the external GPS. The GPS is built into the unit. It's a really robust system. So nothing to worry about, and you have all the data you need. So as Roger said, you can use this 2 wheels with the gyro and the GPS info. Hopping back to kind of how I build my my lap segments is I start out with the remove all button, and I take all my segments that AiM had developed and get rid of them. And then I say, okay, how do I want to break this track down? And the way I really do that is I say I want to link corners that are together, and I want to remove opportunity for variance because of late braking or a kamikaze move or something to that effect. So what I do is I go in and I say, well, if this is turn 1, the braking is probably in this region. So if I break off, say here, where my cursor is, I say that's a spot that's probably before the brake zone. And once I select that spot, I can go down here and say divide. And when I do that, it's going to divide the track at that point. Just to keep things going real quick here is I'm just going to pick the next spot, and I do the same thing. I say divide. And you'll see the colors change, and it's really difficult to see. But right here, there's a tiny black dot that shows you the difference in the two segments. And when we do that, we can go in, select where one of our segment is, and pick the corner button, and that'll change it. AiM has a standard set of colors that corner 1 is green, corner 2 is red, and a straight is blue. I don't approach it to use those colors for anything other than to define my segment. Some people will go in and say all right-hand corners are green, left-hand corners are red, straights are blue, or however they work it. I just like to have the colors alternate so I can see where each segment is. The second little part here that I probably should have said before, but that'll help you, is when you have these segment splits, is we see here that we also have the distance. So we can go into our data and look at where we hit the brakes for a particular corner and pull up all the information of, say, we never hit the brakes before 500 feet. So if we said, well, geez, at 524, that's, maybe 20 feet into the braking zone, so we should move it back. And we can use our data that we create to make this map even better as we go along. And say at the same time as, we're not too far into this and we said, hey, we made a mistake, we can do the same thing. We can click on a segment and remove it. Or if we had trouble, we can just remove it all and start over again. So to show you kind of how this goes again is we can click the point that we want to divide the track at and say divide. And then my personal workflow is I'd go through and I'd say, okay, we want to section off turn 1, and I would divide the track there, and then I would change the color for that segment. And at Watkins Glen, the way I kind of look at it is I'd say, well, geez, at the top of the S's, I'd want to be able to look at the speed again, and I'd divide my track there. And then I'd probably say, well, the back straight, depending if you get a draft or who's around you, that might change. So before the braking zone for the bus stop, I'd probably divide again. And then I'd do the same and divide after the exit of the bus stop. And now as I do it, I start to kind of lose it. And so I don't lose the idea of where all my segments are. I go back, I select one of the segments, and I use the right button here. Sometimes it says corner 1, corner 2, or straight, but I use this button to change my colors. And I would work through kind of the whole track and do my dividing that way. So we have a segment here. This one where we have red and red, I go in and I change that color quick and do it as a really quick way. And sometimes my maps end up just red and blue. Sometimes I get other colors. But I don't really pay too much attention to that that color scheme. And here I made a mistake. Instead of hitting divide, I hit the straight, but we can change those colors back kind of any way we want and divide it. We can put another one. We say we come through the toe, we come up towards the heel. We can divide the track here. We get 2 segments that are the same color. So let's change this one to green. We can change to blue, whatever comes next, how we like to do it. We can divide a segment, change our color, divide a segment, and we get a good mix of colors there. We can even say let's divide in between the high-speed left and the front straight. And then now we have, this is kind of the idea of how I build my corners. Like I said, I don't care about the colors as much as I care about the segments. So this is how I would go about building it. And then when you're done with it, you can go in here and we can say, Watkins Glen sample, and then save it. So you can see when I did that, it changed all the colors up here and changed our map. One of the nice things is when we do that, we can go back and see our previous maps through the map manager. So if we go back up here to where it says map, we can say map and then map manager. And then here's all the maps that I have in here. And you can see, for some tracks like Homestead, I have a number of maps that are pretty similar, maybe slightly different, that we might have been focusing on one specific spot. And we'll see, I have kind of my one standard Watkins Glen and the one we just made. When we get all of these in here, we can then go back and we say, hey, we can modify it, and we're back to the same basic window, but we don't have the original options to our right where AiM will automatically generate it, but we can edit it however we want. We can remove a section, we can remove them all, start over, and do whatever we want. Or, here where we say, hey, we don't want to save this, we could just cancel it. We can also, when we get into the map manager here, we can do some nice things. We can come in here and say we can load this for all the open tests. So if we had 3 Watkins Glen tests that we wanted to look at, we can load this for all of them. We can delete a map, modify it as we talked about. We can mail a map off to someone. So if you were prepping for an event or doing some post-race analysis and you wanted to share it with someone, you can mail it off. You can export it to save it if you want to attach to an email that way. We can import maps from someone, and we can jump into the map folder. So this is really kind of the map manager window and the different ways we can use it. And then the last part of it is we can say to just show the track map if we didn't have it open. And it goes through and it gives us all of our segments. Are there not good maps available? So Mark's question, are there no maps available? Maps, you can use the ones that AiM automatically generates, or you can use your own. For a little bit, I had hosted a number of maps that people had made, and they'd email them in, and I'd share those for people. But what I found a lot of times was people want their own, or if you want to focus on a specific spot in a track, people make their own. So it's not, and with the GPS, it becomes pretty quick to make them, and the maps are a lot more accurate. So I don't know of anyone that shares them a lot or kind of hosts them for everybody anymore. So you're kind of stuck making your own if you want something more specific than the general one that AiM gives you. So sorry, there's not too much more to help with that part, Mark. The area where this comes in, and it's actually not something I have in my notes, but I think it's important because we just talked about what we do with these to make all these segments, is the segment analysis. So as we go up and we say, we can do this kind of a few ways, as we can go to view and then down to the segment analysis, which I'm missing. This isn't the way I usually jump to it. So we can go, it'll show up in track line split times. So when we open up our split times here, let's just close that map. This gives us all those splits for that whole session. And there's a lot of data here, and this is a spot where we're going to jump into another webinar one day and make all of our, or how to get into this segment analysis much deeper. But what we see is if we show our track map here, we can see this segment 1 is our segment 1 here. Segment 2 is turn 1, and we see it here. So this is the way that we get to go through all of our own segments, and this is where the data shows up. And just to give you a quick example, if we said we wanted to open a different map and apply it, we'll see if we can, we're going to close this for a second. If we just look for a real easy one, we're going to see it's 12.9, 15.1. When we load a new map, it recalculates all these and changes them to whatever that map file was. So now we see it went from 12.9 and 15.1 to 27 and 29. So you'll see different numbers as we change those segments. And I think it becomes really important is then to give you a quick example where this becomes important. We can go in here and we're going to remove all our segments. And we're going to go, hey, we want to look at something really specific and say we want to divide the track into just, maybe we want to focus on just the bus stop. So we're going to divide the track here and here, and we're going to change the color. So now we're going to say we have the bus stop and everything before and everything ends, sort of like the t-shirt that says racing is life and everything else before and after doesn't matter. Or here's our chance, and we're going to say Watkins Glen bus stop. So now what we're able to do is if we open up that map again by going to map, show track map, we can see where this is all our bus stop data. We can see there's some pretty big variance in here. We go from the fast, which is highlighted by AiM, turned blue by AiM, the 8.595. We got one that's 10 seconds. So 1.4 seconds lower, we got an 11. We see some pretty big variance in here. So it's a chance that we could really hone in and go, well, geez, what's different about the bus stop in this versus some of these others? Because it says our average was 9.199. So what do we have to do from 9.2 to consistently run basically an 8.6? This is the power of the data and where we can really dig in at other points and figure out what's different. If we have a Smarty Cam hooked up, we can jump into this session and say, hey, what did it look like when we did that versus some of these others? We can go back and look at the breakpoint and the speeds and all those things to figure out what happened. So I don't want to get too deep in that tonight and take all our time there, because segment analysis is certainly going to be something we're going to focus on at another point, but I wanted to show where all of this segmenting ends up and where it's important. The other quick spot I want to show you that it becomes is when we look at our track report. So I'll highlight that up here is the track with the little flag on it. When we open that up, and let me get this down so we all see it here, is this track report, which we're not going to jump super deep into, but when this logs a value that we're going to look at, and let's just change these from logger temperature to say speed quick, is these spots where it can give us a value, and these breakoffs come from that segment map. And looking at it quick here off the cuff, our reference channel is what was throwing us off a little bit, but we can see that these flags that pop up are based upon the segments that we made before. That's where they come from. So it's another spot where that map does end up mattering. So I think that gives us a good idea of segments, and if people have some more questions on that, type them up and we'll try to cover them tonight, or if we need to, we can do a whole nother session some night on just the segment part. But the next part I wanted to jump into was the TrackMate integration, because TrackMate now is no longer making systems. They're not selling anything. I've heard that they're repairing systems that are in the field, but I haven't heard of anyone sending them in. But one of the things that happened as they stopped making systems is that AiM purchased the rights to those data files and the file system and how it's constructed and everything else. And what that ended up meaning is that we can now import a TrackMate file into an AiM Race Studio Analysis, so we can compare it to an AiM file and look at it. So that really provides an opportunity. So if somebody switches from a TrackMate system to an AiM system, or if they have a friend that was running TrackMate, they can import that data as well. And the way we do that is it's pretty straightforward. As we go to File, and then we come down to Import a TrackMate file. And I saved one to my desktop tonight, so we can go in. It's not showing up. I must have saved the wrong one. So let's go and we'll see if we can find it quick, because I could remember where it was. Very good. Documents, data. We should have. All right. Here's an old file, and we won't dig into it, but we'll see how this works. Is we can pick one of these TrackMate files. Oh, we got one with an error. So my plan tonight to show you this and not double checking is backfiring a little bit, but we'll try another one and see what we can get for you. Hopefully we get one to work. It's worked in the past. It's not something that I do real often, but it's something that people are starting to use more and more. And I know Roger's had success with it in the past, and I've had it work before. So it's interesting that we're having some trouble, but yeah, so we might not be able to show you, but you see the process in how to do that tonight. So sorry about that. You have the process. If somebody has some files that they want to try that with, or they have any trouble with, please send me a note and we can work on that. Then the next thing I wanted to look at with people was an intro to the math channels and how math channels work. So I'm going to go in here and we'll just open up another one of my data files that's from LimeRock. And this one, I don't know if I picked a good file. We can go back, use my favorite method of moving data around. We can open up a data file. We get some speeds in here. I think we, oh, I'm failing on picking good files for you guys. Here we go. So now we have a better one. We have our speed trace, our gears here, and we say, hey, we'd like to look at some math channels with it. So the two ways to get to math channels is to go to modify, or we can click the little square root button up here. My default, I always go to the button. And when we open up the math file, we get this, the math channel file, we get this window. And before we dig deep into it, what a math channel is it's sort of like a formula in Excel that you can combine or change other channels that you recorded, and you can make them into some new sort of channel. And we'll see some different ways that we can do that. So if we just take a tour of this window, we can see this is our data file that we have open. This will be the list of all the math channels that we have. And then they break the rest of the window down in a couple ways for us. As we have our channel parameters, and these are the channel parameters for the channel that we're creating, the math channel we're making. So we can go in and we can change the name. We can define the unit of measure. You know, if it was a speed channel, if it's a force, if it's G forces, we can put all those things. We can set the scale, which can be full scale to, you know, if a full scale, if it's going to read up to 10, we can put 10. If it's going to read to 100, we can put 100, whatever that is. The same thing for the zero. The zero scale is really, it's the minimum. So you can think of this as maximum and minimum. The sampling rate is the number of times a second we want to calculate that. And typically I say is we want to calculate it at whatever rate we were recording our data at. The filter is a way, as we pull this drop-down box, is a moving average filter that we can use to smooth out whatever data we're collecting. The decimal figures is just how many numbers to the right of the decimal point we want. Something that you won't use very often, but we see is to use as a speed channels in the data analysis is the software is always using something as a reference for our speed. And we can change what that is. Typically, you would not want to do this unless you were using a wheel speed as your reference and you needed to correct it or something to that effect. But otherwise, that's not a box that we ever really check. The next part of this window is our formula construction. And in here, it gives us a number of things that we can use to develop and to build our formula. The first is constants. AiM gives us a whole bunch of them. It gives us a conversion kilometers to miles, miles to kilometers, miles per hour to feet a second, miles to feet, all these different setups that they've put in here so we don't have to try to calculate them that we use a lot. You can also add your own. One of the ones they put in here that we use in a lot of channels, if you're calculating something like oversteer or understeer that you'd see in the Bob Knox book, you would use your wheelbase. So you can put that in instead of having to type in whatever that value is all the time. It's already there. Or mass, if you needed to put the weight of the car for a formula. They're all there so you don't have to do them all the time. The next part of that is we have our basic symbols and operators. And these are the math functions, just like you would use in Excel or just like you'd use in basic algebra: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, exponential powers. The comma is they use as a symbol, which is a separator, and the same thing with your parentheses. The box below that is our longer list of functions. Everything from square roots to logs, sines, cosines, derivatives that we use in quite a few things, lap integrals, if you just need a minimum or a maximum, some different filters, some bit operators, all the way down to we have things like greater than, less than, equal to, and just more functions. I think one of the most important parts of this is the identifiers. The identifiers is a list of all of our logs channels plus any math channels that we have. And where that gets very important is the way the software works is it's very literal, just like Excel would be. If you misspell something or you use a different name, it will not work. A classic case is if it says RPM, and you might read a book and you might look at the Bob Knox book, and instead of using RPM, it says engine. That's a spot where it wouldn't work. So before we kind of jump into building a quick formula, I saw we had two questions I think that are important from James. And the first one, does a channel created get saved or just the formula and it's recalculated when opening a new test? You can save and export your math channel as a list, which is something I do a lot, and I can show you that. And then it gets recalculated every time you open a file and or every time you come into this window and say, okay. It calculates all the channels for all the laps and all the data points. And we'll see that in a minute. And then your next question is there a practical purpose for math channels with an AiM solo? Absolutely. The most used channels, the one I'm going to hop into next and show people how it works, is I don't want to get super deep into how all the math channels part work because that's definitely a webinar on its own. But what I wanted to show is AiM comes with a number of math channels. And one of the most popular channels that you'll see discussed and looked at and used through all data analysis, and really it's something that's used at all levels, is either called Gsum or combined G, or I think those are the two names you'll hear about it the most. And that's really a measure of your traction circle. And for people that want to learn a little bit more about this, if you don't have one of those books, you can shoot me an email. I've written some about it, and I can share that article with you. But the Gsum is really a measure of how much traction you're using in the car at all times. And there's a really simple way to calculate it. And you can do this no matter what AiM logger you have. You can do it with a solo. You can do it with one of the dashes. You can do it with all the new loggers. And it gives you a great measurement of the data. As you look at my list, if you want to just see some other ones, there's some really easy ones. You can do max speed no matter which one you have if you're looking at gearing or you just want to see how fast you go. If you have an RPM input, which you wouldn't have with a solo, you could do gear. You can calculate corner radius. You can make a simple math channel that says when you're on the brakes. So it would show you a point on the brakes and off the brakes. And then with that, you could calculate the distance or the time that you were on the brakes in a lap. You can calculate the total miles in a test. You could calculate the total miles in a session that you're on the brake, and doing this all just from a solo. You could do it with, you can also calculate some other channels. These are ones that you'd learn if you do the John Block seminar of slowing, that tells you how much braking you do in a lap. But the one I think we'll look at quickly is just the Gsum. And I'm going to put this into our file here, so when we open it up, we'll be able to look at it. So the simple formula for the Gsum in AiM is it's the square root of the lateral acceleration squared plus the longitudinal acceleration squared. So without going into the deep details of the math behind it and how it works, we can say this is a channel that comes with the software that that we can use, and we'll take a look at that graph in a minute. And the other nice part about the way the software works, it gives us a chance to test the channel, and it will hopefully give us the error if there is one. So when we look at it, it goes, hey, this channel name, error, an identifier, a constant or a symbol is unknown. So when we look at it and we say, you know, acceleration lateral, well, we say we know that's a channel because we're trying to add that. So we can go into our list of identifiers here and pull that up, and to get some nice easy data, we can look at it just like if we had a solo. We can change it to GPS lateral acceleration. We can test it again. It says, oh, the same problem for longitudinal. We can change that. And a nice trick is when it highlights what the error is, when it highlighted that field, we can double click in the identifier window and it'll replace it for us. So we don't have to type it. We don't have to make any mistakes that way. We can go back, test our channel. It says it's okay. And then we can pull it up. And now's a chance that we can graph that. We're going to put it up here to show James something we can do with the solo to look at that data. So as we look at that data, if we say that's a measure of the total G-force used in a run. And if we look at, this is New Hampshire Motor Speedway for anyone that's been there before. Let's just change this one. It's reading a little bit weird here. We can change this to say, let's try. There we go. We have our speed here. And this green graph, as we look, is our Gsum. And anywhere that dips means that we're not using the full potential of the tire at that point. So as we look at it, we can say as we approach turn 1 and we see this dip, that's a point where we're slowing down. We can see our speed coming down. We have longitudinal G-forces going. And then it drops off. And we see the slope of our speed trace doesn't change. So that's a lateral acceleration problem because that's our two components, is the longitudinal and the lateral acceleration. So this gives us insight into how the car was driven through these points. Again, it's one we can jump into later. I can share some more information after this session, but it gives you a chance to see an immediate use of data that you'd get out of a solo. And using the Gsum or the combined G is a spot where very quickly you can jump in here and identify spots for improvement and spots where you can dig into the data deeper. Like I can look at this file and very quickly say, you know, this is a spot where the person could have trail braked more. Probably the same thing kind of in this point, that there was something going on, the same into turn 6. And then as we get over here a little bit, these look a little bit better maybe in this point again. Actually, nope, I'm sorry, that's just a dip from a bump or something. But it's all a way you can use your solo data and look at unrealized or unused traction that was there very quickly, and it gives you a spot to look deeper into the data and see what else is happening. So hopefully that kind of answers your question, James, and gives you guys a quick insight into the math channels and how to jump into them. And again, that the Practical Guide to Data Analysis by Bob Knox is a spot where when you buy his book, it has that great resource at the end of it where it has all these math channels for you. So you can read the chapter and see what you would learn from that math channel and how to use that information. And then he gives you the math channel. So you can jump right back into this window, create the math channel, and then use that to improve your driving or whoever you're working with. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of an insight into math channels and how things work a little bit. I know we're not getting too in-depth because I'm trying to hit a lot of the topics that everybody had sent me and the things that were the most popular. And the next one is kind of where we're going to finish up a little bit, but something I wanted to add and help people because I found it's a spot where people have a little bit of trouble is when people jump into analysis, the area where they run into trouble is they'll want to look at a few things. So here we have our speed, we have our GSum, and I'm going to limit this to say if we just had a solo, what data are we going to pull up? And we say here's a perfect example of what we can get. If we look over, we have GPS speed, GPS lateral acceleration, GPS longitudinal acceleration. With these channels, we can learn a lot about how a car performed and what a driver did as they drove. But if we don't put the data and we don't display things right, the visual part of it becomes the limit into what we can learn. So when we jump into this, where people start to get stuck is we look at this graph and everything's laid on top. All we can see is the miles per hour that the car went, and we don't have too much information because the display is not working for us yet. So the first thing I like to point out to people is these check boxes to the left. So in AiM speak, the measures are the channels that were recorded and that we can display in our graph. That's where we see this GPS speed, GPS lateral acceleration, GPS longitudinal acceleration. The color is the color gets displayed that we can change. And these spots for the checkbox is actually what gives us our scale. So if we go in and we check these boxes, well, now we have a scale that we can look at these graphs. So we know a lot more now as we can say, well, geez, on these, this is the amount of G-force that we're able to develop. But it's still kind of hard because all the graphs are overlaid. Now what we can do is we can use the views up here, and it looks sort of the backwards or the L's in the three buttons that we have with the L's. The first single one says that we're going to take all the graphs that we choose over here and put them on one graph. This is nice if we're looking at one or two things. Sometimes even with two, and certainly with three or four, it becomes too much information in one spot. So then we can use the next one. Actually, I'm sorry, the third one. And that will put everything on its own graph for us. So no matter how many items we start adding, it puts them all on their own. This is a great way that we can display more information and have it all in a way that we can see and use. So we say, hey, we add more and more channels. Here I put the altitude because sometimes that's a good measure of if the track's going up or down, and the topography that we're driving through. And with the solo, we can even add, if you have it plugged into your car, you'd even have an external voltage that you could look at that and see. So we say, well, geez, this is pretty nice because now we have all these graphs shown on their own. And now we can really look at it and compare the points and do everything. But we say, geez, this yellow one here is kind of hard to see. All you have to do to change that is you go to that channel, we click on it, it'll bring up, and we can choose whatever colors we want. So you could say, hey, let's make that line black. And go, okay, that's a lot better. And now we have information that we can use because we can see how it all worked and what was going on. The middle button here, right here, is the one that I probably use the most. And when we click that, it's going to put everything back together. And this is the classic case of a jumble of information we can't do anything with. What we do now is these numbers all along the side correspond to the graphs. And what we'll see is if we say we want GPS speed first, and then we want lateral acceleration and longitudinal acceleration on the same graph. So now we have speed and everything else marked with the 1 up top, and the 2 that have a number 2 in the next graph. And we can go and say we want altitude, say, as our 4th graph. And we have this number 4 here that we clicked on, and it puts us in our 4th graph down. We lost our scale, so we can go back and put our check mark in, and we get our scale back. We can go to our last, the voltage one, and we can move that to say 3. And let's put our scale on it. So this is a quick bit of tutorial of how to set the graphs up in a way that you like, in a way that you can use and get information from them, rather than being stuck with exactly what was put there. Because a lot of times when we pull everything up, we can't see all of it. And when we put more and more things on it, it just becomes a jumbled mess that we can't make perfect sense of. So this is a great spot where we can really go in to do all this. So I want to go back, and I'm just looking at the comments a little bit here, and I see Mark asked how I spread those out. Mark, can you give me a little more clarification of what it was, or maybe I had already answered the question? Oh, yep. So the L's, if James has this right, is the L's up here, where we see right here, is I refer to the L's, it's the views, that's what sets the 3 ways to go. So when we click those, and I'm going to go through, the first one again is everything in one graph. And Mark, if you were comparing multiple cars or multiple laps, as Mark had put up, we're going to change this again for a minute. Mark said when he does it, he changes the color of the graph to match the car. So what I'm going to do is just pick a couple laps here, and we're going to kind of go Mark's way. And I think that's a really good note of how to do it. Is now when we pull up our speed, and as this is a spot we can talk about quickly, as we pull up multiple laps, we see them up here, and we see all the colors here. So we can go in and edit each lap's color. For some reason, people probably laugh when I do it. I always end up with red and blue, because those are the colors that have good contrast to me, and I pick. But any color works, and now we can see that we have all these graphs overlaid from all the laps, and if we had multiple sessions, we could have multiple cars and everything else set up. Right now it's just laps, and this is where we can dive into the data later on to do this. And then what we do is when we go back up here to our view icons, is the second one, I think, is where Mark had asked, that actually won't show up with this because we have all the same channel. But if we said we picked the accelerations again, it would go back to what we had defaulted, or we can put them all on their own. So these views, again, it's a chance when you get in there to your data, really get into these buttons and use this to your advantage to figure out how do you want to display data to really look at things. It's one of the most powerful things that people don't use enough, I think. Jeff has a question here. If I want to compare brake traces from 2 or 3 different laps for, say, one corner, how do I blow up the graph for that corner? Awesome question, Jeff. Let's look at, so that, here, if we had a solo, we'd look at longitudinal acceleration. Here we have a whole bunch of graphs. The colors don't work well. But another point that Roger sent me a message about is we have this other option up here that we have per lap color. And what per lap color does is it takes these color icons and it applies it to all the channels underneath. So if we select that box, we'll see now that the blue, green, red, pink matches all of these channels down here. And I'm just going to scroll up to that first one. We see the whole thing, so it doesn't look odd. And we see these colors here on the far left match these. And those match all of our items in here. So we say, hey, this is a great, now we have our laps, and we can say, blue corresponds to the 123.233, and we can match those up. So now to get towards Jeff's question, we say, hey, we want to look, this is turn 1. How do we get into there? There's 2 ways, Jeff. Is the way I use the most is I always have a scrolly mouse, or even on my laptop, I use the scroll pad. If you click to an area and then you use the scroll and you scroll in, it will zoom. So that's what we saw here. And if we go back, I can show you is if we look down here, we're working in distance mode, and we see 0, 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 1,500, and as the lap goes on to a little over 8,000 at the end of the lap. And when we click a point and we start to zoom in, notice the scale is changing. Now we're 2, 4, 600 instead of the spread we had before, and we can zoom in more. Now you'll see we started to zoom out of the space we wanted. We're not seeing that the initial hit of the brake and the end of the straightaway. We can see we're at 400 feet past start finish. What we can do is if we click on the numbers graph, the distance graph at the bottom, we can drag it to the side and recenter our information. So now we're back to seeing this is where we hit the brake. This is our brake application and the trail off. The other neat thing that we can do with this is as we look at our GPS map, and Mark, to your point, I think it was you that had asked, do you have to have the GPS or is the GPS better? Well, one of the great things is now when we click on a point, and I'm just going to move these windows around so we can do this and see everything at once, the GPS point on our GPS map right here matches our data point. So if we want to compare the brake application, we can say it was here, and this is in relation to turn one. So it's a nice feature that we can see right on the map where we are without having to guess or anything else. And we can say, you know, if we came back to where the longitudinal G's got back to 0, we can say that's the point that we were all the way off the brake, that we really finished our trail braking. And we can zoom into that point more if we want. We can scroll in and really get down there. We can also scroll out and see that point on the map. So my favorite way is to use that scroll, Jeff, to get back to the exact zooming part. The other ways that we can zoom are with the zoom functions up here that I use far, far less, just because my habit of using the computer is through the scroll wheel and the mouse. But these zoom functions work very similar. As we have a 2D zoom that we can select an area and it'll zoom into what we did. And you'll see when I did that, I did not select the whole area. So let me go back for a second and I'll be able to get this in here for you a little bit better. Is we have our turn one. So we're looking again, here's turn one. And we say, geez, we want to zoom in just to this point. So we can pick this 2D zoom, which is a great tool, and I probably should use it more. And we can highlight the block that we want to look at. We can make it bigger, smaller, whatever that space is. And when we let go, it zooms us right into that area. So now we have everything we were looking at. The one trick when we use this is that we have to click out of the 2D zoom, otherwise we stay in it and we get really frustrated that it won't go away. I speak from experience, so then we go back to the 2D zoom and toggle that button off. And you can see, hopefully, is when it's selected, you can see it looks like it's depressed. It's a fine change, but it is a change. And then when we go back and turn it off, hopefully you can see it goes back to the regular gray and it's not highlighted anymore. So now that we kind of made that mistake and we say, geez, we're so zoomed in, when we look at our distance graph, we're down to 0.2 foot increments. We can't get any good data for a general view from this. So the way we can zoom out, my way is to simply scroll back out with the scroll on the mouse. We see that working. We can also go back to our zoom buttons up here and use them. One of the nice parts with the zoom is it gives us a chance that we can go through. It gives us the display of what it really is right underneath. It's funny, before we started this, Roger and I were talking a little bit about hotkeys, and it's something that I don't use in this software a lot. I'm not a huge hotkey guy, but one of the things we can do is we can zoom out to the one lap, and we can use that button. It puts us right back to one lap. And then we can use our up and down keys to work on zooming into sections. Not something I do as much, but something you can do, or you can use the zoom buttons here and zoom into a section and drag you in. So hopefully, Jeff, that kind of gives you a way that you can get into those specific places that you want. The one I use there the most is the 2D spread, because I'll look at it and go, geez, I want to get into this corner. I can put everything I want to look at in the box, and then it brings me right there. Mark says he likes the tall graph to make the differences stand out more. I think what he means is just to get the scaling probably where you want, and that it is something that helps a lot. Is a trick there is when you grab the graphs on the side, you can right click on them and move the graph around some as well, or there's other ways that you can do it. So Mark's saying move the track map to the corner. I'm not sure I totally follow, Mark. Let's see if we go back to a full lap.
I think what he's talking about, Matt, is sizing the majors graph all the way to the bottom, and then have the map off to the right side instead of sharing half vertically.
Gotcha.
There you go. So then pulling it down, he gets more
yep.
granularity.
Kind of go this way.
The axis.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to do it, and to go with that is one of the things I think that helps people a lot is we can double click to auto scale it, or sometimes is like if I'm looking at just lateral acceleration or longitudinal acceleration, I said, hey, I really want to look at braking. What I'll actually do is go into my channel over here on the left and right click on it, and that's how I open this. Let me go. I have my webinar window here. I got to get out of my way and just exit. So if you go back to your channel that you want to change, right click and it pops up the properties for it. So one of the things I'll do with lateral acceleration, if that's what I'm working with, is instead of having it as 0.35 as the maximum, I'll change that to 0. And then we say apply and exit, and it just gives me that little more scale. So I say anything above 0 is acceleration, so I can kind of block that off and not look at it, and then just say these are all my deaccelerations that I look at. For me, that works pretty well. The only thing that I say with a little caution there is as you scale your graph sizes left and right, sometimes it spreads the graph out and it can change how you look at things. So I would just say is I always set my screen up that I use the full width kind of this way, which I don't know why I never really thought about doing it the way Mark had suggested, which I think is a good way too, and I'm going to play with that some. But you kind of get used to looking at it in the scaling that you've become accustomed to. So it's a good chance to try some things out and just get used to it and not get caught off guard that you think something is wrong when it's really just a little bit of a different view. The next one that we got here from Jeff that I think is a really good question we're going to talk about for a minute, and then I don't want to run too long tonight. So we'll hit this, and then I think we'll call it a night, and you guys have given me some really great ideas to use for some future webinars, and I'll post them up there so we can get into these things a little deeper. But Jeff asked, how do we use the comparison of the timelines taken? See comparison. I think Jeff is actually talking about the driven line in the GPS. Great question. So when we jump into our GPS map, we can see here that there's a number of lines and we have all our points. If we look, here's our point on the graph that we're looking at. We can see there's different colors in here. And what we can do to look at that, and this isn't something I use a lot. I like to go to video more than I like to look at just the GPS line. But again, we can scroll in and zoom into these points. And this gives us, we have our scale on the bottom right that gives us the distance change, and then we can see where that is here. For people that know this track at NHMS, there's a lot of room. It's a pretty wide corner. So one of these I was probably trying something much lower to see if it worked, or maybe I was on a pass or something like that. But you can jump into this and see the difference in the line. And as you do that, one of the tricks that Roger had taught me, and he goes over in his class, and I think it's a pretty neat trick, is up here is the rotation for our GPS map. And this takes a little bit of a knack to get into, is as we rotate our map, we can rotate it and then drag it to match up with our scale. So you see what I did here, again, is these buttons rotate, and then as we rotate the map, we can lay it over the scale. And now we have an easy way, we have like a built-in ruler, basically. So if we go back up, we can see, you know, we can bend these around. We kind of get them lined up pretty good. And then we keep zooming in. And as we do that, you see our scales down to 20 feet. And we can get in here pretty deep. And let's get it down. We got 18 feet. You know, where we can keep zooming and really fill the scale up. So now we got a pretty good one, right? We have 8 feet on this scale. So here's halfway, 4 feet. So we can say, you know, these 3 lines were within 4 feet. These two, were, you know, if we look between red and green, we're really within about a foot, maybe just a hair over, and in total about 4 feet. And then we see we get that other one that's, I don't even know if we'll get it on this scale. Yeah. So now we can say that's, what, 16, 20 feet off or so. So hopefully, Jeff, that kind of answers you how to dig in and look at the fine points of the line and zoom in. And again, we can scroll in and out on these, or let me highlight here, we can use the zoom buttons. Like I said, I default to just scrolling with the mouse and then dragging things around. But you know, you can, what's sort of interesting is we look at a track and we scroll around here, we see certain areas like the apex, you know, you get down and they get pretty close. So I think we even covered a few more things that I had thought about tonight. If nobody has any other questions that pop up here, I think we'll call it a night for tonight. I really thank you guys all for coming. I think we had some great questions. We saw some really good areas that we get to look through. I'm going to take these notes and I'm going to see the things that you guys brought up and some of the other questions, and we'll hit those in future ones. I will also take this recording and convert it so I can put that up tomorrow, and I'll get that on YouTube and send everybody a link to it. So for you folks, you can always refer back to it. You can look at just the beginning and get all the references I gave you. The folks that didn't make it in tonight can look at all the watch the whole thing. But again, thank you guys for coming out. I hope I gave you something. I didn't put you to bed too early, and I look forward to doing some more of these. So have a great night, and Happy New Year.